Have you ever wondered why Thomas asked to see the holes in Jesus' hands and to see the scars on his side? Was it because of lack of faith? Was it because of distrust? What kind of Thomas is actually presented to us in the Bible? Is he a doubting Thomas or a believing Thomas? Join me as we find out what kind of disciple Thomas was. Good morning once again. We have entered the second Sunday of the Easter season. We had the Easter Sunday last weekend, and now we are almost a week after that Resurrection Sunday. And so our passage today puts us exactly on this weekend, 7 days or 8 days after the Easter Sunday weekend. So I would like us to go to the passage for this morning, which is from the book of John, chapter 20. I'm going to read from verses 24 to 29. It says, "Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, 'We have seen the Lord.' But he said to them, 'Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe.' A week later, his disciples were in the house again, which is where we are today. So a week later, which is probably today or yesterday, the disciples were together in the house again, and Thomas was with them this time. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, 'Peace be with you.' Then he said to Thomas, 'Put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it to my side. Stop doubting and believe.' And Thomas said to him, 'My Lord and my God.' Then Jesus told him, 'Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed.'" Now this is a fascinating story because the Apostle Thomas, who was one of the 12, is well known for his doubting the resurrection of Jesus. And today in English we have the saying, the doubting Thomas, or the doubting Thomases, talking about the people who are skeptical about things and who don't want to believe. We nickname them the doubting Thomases. But I would like us to just take a closer look at Thomas and see, in fact, that I don't think he is, in fact, a doubting Thomas. I think he is more a believing Thomas than even where the other believers were. So there are a few points I want to bring out in this story of today. And I want us to first reflect on the apostle himself. The apostle Thomas is one of those that history tells us that he went to the east, he went to India, to the Asia area, and that's where he preached and actually was killed in those areas. So he went probably the furthest of all the other apostles in terms of preaching the gospel. He went as far as India, probably China and Russia in those days. And so he was one of the very dedicated disciples of Jesus after this event where he himself experienced the resurrection of Jesus. Now, I don't know whether you're aware that Thomas, he is one of the few disciples of the 12 who actually gets a few mentions in the Gospels. Now, in the Synoptic Gospels, you find that Peter and James and John are primarily the ones who are mentioned, including Judas Iscariot, obviously because of he sold Jesus, he betrayed Jesus. But Thomas and the others are never mentioned. They're only mentioned when the 12 are listed, and that's the only time you hear about them. However, in the Gospel of John, John gives Thomas a lot of airtime. So it is through the Gospel of John that we are given an insight into what kind of disciple or apostle Thomas was. And I would like us to look at a few of these passages in the book of John where we are told about Thomas, so that we can see what kind of person Thomas was. Because when we read our passage of today in John 20, then we have a context of what kind of person was saying the things that he was saying. So if you go to John chapter 11, that's the first time John introduces us in some level of detail about the apostle Thomas, or the disciple Thomas. Now in John 11, that's the story when Jesus gets a message that his friend Lazarus is sick. and therefore he must come to heal him. Now, Jesus decides not to go, and so he doesn't go. Now, after a while, I would say, I think about 3 days or so, Jesus said, let's go to the disciples. Now, I just want us to enter into the story in verse 7 of John 11. It says, and then Jesus said to his disciples, let us go back to Judea. Okay? And then in verse 8, but Rabbi, the disciple says, a short while ago, the Jews were trying to stone you, and yet you are going back to Judea? And then verse 16, Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us all go along with the teacher, so that we may die with him. You see what Thomas is doing? Now, Jesus has been to Judea a few days before, and the religious leaders there wanted to kill him. They wanted to stone him to death, and he escaped. And now, after he hears about Lazarus being sick, in fact, he was told in this case that he was dead, he tells them, let's go back to Judea. And they say to him, how can you want to go back to this place where they wanted to kill you? They're going to kill you. And then Thomas is the one who stands up and says, guys, even if they were to kill him, let's go with him to Judea so that we may die with him, if that's what happens. So Thomas is the one who understood that if Jesus were to be killed, he would rather be there to die with him. When the others were saying, no, let's stay away from Judea. Let's stay away from Jerusalem. Let's not go near there, because there you are going to face danger. They are going to kill you. And yet, Thomas is the one who says to the others, let's go with him and die with him if that is necessary. Now, the question I have for you is whether you would like to be like this Thomas or like the other disciples. Because this Thomas is the Thomas who was dedicated and committed to Jesus. That even though Jesus was going to face death, he would rather face death with him rather than run away. Now we know at the end, when Jesus was arrested, they all ran away and disappeared. But the fact of the matter is, at this point, Thomas is the one who was saying, I'm willing to die with Jesus. So even at the time when others were not believing yet about the kind of person Jesus was, the fact that he was going to die for them, Thomas was already saying, I'm willing to die with him. So that's the first point I just wanted to take note of, that John gives us about the Apostle Thomas. That Thomas is one of those that were very early in the ministry of Jesus, was willing to die with Jesus. Now in verse 53, we know for a fact that in fact they did want to kill him, because Jesus does go back to Judea, and then Lazarus is raised from the dead. Now, because of the attention that Jesus was getting for raising Lazarus from the dead, it says in verse 53, from that day, that is John 11, verse 53, from that day on, the Jewish authorities made plans to kill Jesus. So it was true that by going back to Judea, Jesus was putting himself in the firing line of those religious leaders in Jerusalem who wanted to kill him. So that's the first point I wanted to take note of about Thomas, that he was not an unbelieving person. He believed fully in Jesus, and he wanted to die with Jesus, and he wanted to follow Jesus even to his death. So that's the first point. The second point that we find, many of you probably are familiar with the statement, I am the way and the truth and the life. It is the key verse that is shown in our Speaking of Life videos. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Now, we always quote that verse, which Jesus said, but most of us are probably not aware, why did Jesus say that? Why did Jesus say, I am the way, the truth, and the life? Now, John tells us why Jesus said that. So in the book of John chapter 14, in verse 5, okay, this is when Jesus was telling them, I'm going to go away to the Father. Now you know where I'm going. And Thomas, amongst all the disciples, is the one who wants clarification, because he wants to go along. As you saw in verse 11, chapter 11, he wants to go with Jesus wherever Jesus goes, and if Jesus is going to be killed, he wants to be killed with him. Now, Jesus tells them, I'm going to the Father, and you know where I'm going. And in verse 5, Thomas says, Lord, we don't know where you are going, so how can we know the way? Because Thomas wanted to go along. And then in verse 6 of John 14, that's when Jesus answers, I am the way and the truth and the life. So Jesus then replies to Thomas' question, we don't know where you're going, how can we then know the way? It is on that question that Jesus gives us, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So we will never have heard this verse in the Bible if Thomas did not ask the question, we don't know where you're going, how can we know the way? What is the way? And Jesus then tells us, he is the way. So today, you and I know that Jesus is the way because of Thomas. So this is the kind of disciple or apostle Thomas was. He is the one who helped us to know the truth about who Jesus is, that he is the way to eternal life. He is the way to God. He is the truth and he is the life. So those are the two things that John tells us about Thomas. But the third thing he tells us is then in chapter 20, which we read earlier. Okay? So in verse 19, let's just go back a few steps to verse 19 of chapter 20. We didn't read that earlier. It says, it was late that Sunday evening. That is on the Easter Sunday evening. So Jesus was discovered to have risen from the grave in the morning by Mary. She told the disciples, and that Sunday evening, this is what happens. So it was late that Sunday evening, and the disciples were gathered together behind locked doors. Then Jesus came and stood among them. Peace be with you, he said. Okay? And then in verse 24, one of the 12 disciples, Thomas called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, we have seen the Lord. And then Thomas said to them, unless I see the scars of the nails in his hands, and put my finger on those scars, and my hand in his side, I will not believe. Now, this is the part where sometimes we look at Thomas for saying this and think that he was less of a believer in Jesus. And I think the opposite is actually true. You will have noticed that in chapter 11 and in chapter 14, and now here in chapter 20, when John mentions Thomas, he always mentions that he was also called the twin. Thomas means twin. Okay, both in the Aramaic and in the Greek, the name that he was given means twin. Now it means Thomas was a twin. Now I know I've grown up in a village where there were a few boys or girls who were twins. It was very difficult to tell them apart. Very difficult to tell them apart. And because of that, it is very easy to be fooled by twins. In fact, I know that a lot of twins who are identical twins fool people like that. They play people because people cannot tell them apart. So they pretend to be each other all the time. So Thomas probably had been confused with his twin brother many times before, where people think he is his twin brother. And he's saying, the only way you can tell, and this is how over time I've learned to tell between twins. I normally look at their face and try to look for any scar or anything in their face which the one has that the other one doesn't have. And that's the only thing that helps me to be able to tell the twins apart sometimes. And so Thomas says, unless I can see that there are scars of nails in his hand, I won't believe. Because he knows there was only one Jesus who hanged on that cross. So if there is a Jesus look-alike who's claiming to be Jesus who came back to life, if he doesn't have the scars on his hand, then it can't be him. And this is why Thomas, in my view, was not an unbelieving person. So I don't think Thomas is a doubting Thomas. I think he's a believing Thomas. And let's just go through a few points just to emphasize that point. Firstly, because he was a twin, he knows one can be fooled by twins. So he doesn't want to believe an imposter, somebody who's simply claiming to be Jesus, come back to life. He doesn't want that. He wants to verify the facts that the Jesus that the others say they've seen is the Jesus that he knows was killed on the cross. He wants to see. And The fact that he even talks about the nails on his hands and the side, for me, it sounds like Thomas, in fact, unlike the others who ran away, when Jesus was hanging on the cross, Thomas was standing there watching. He saw what happened. He saw them nail his hands. He saw that soldier, Roman soldier, stick the spear on his side. That's why he can say, I know there is a hole on his side. I want to see that. I know they've nailed his hands. I want to see those scars. So I think, in fact, Thomas, even though we're not told by the gospel narratives, it is fair to conclude that Thomas was standing on Golgotha that previous weekend. He saw when Jesus was put on the cross. He saw what happened to him and when he died. That's why he's able to know where the scars are on the body of the Jesus who died. And therefore he's saying, if this Jesus who claimed he was Jesus who came to see you guys, unless he has those scars, I won't believe that it is him. So that's the first point, that because he is a twin, he knows not to be fooled by imposters. He wants to see the evidence. Secondly, Jesus himself had warned them that there will be people who come claiming to be Jesus. There are people who are going to come, even today, where people in I think it was in Uganda or Kenya, there was somebody who was claiming to be Jesus with long hair, a white man. And he was walking around the street and some pastors there were inviting him to their churches because they were saying Jesus has come back. Their stories are there online if you want to check them out. So there are people who throughout the ages have been claiming to be Jesus. And Jesus had warned about that there are people who are going to come and claim to be Jesus. And he's saying, don't be fooled by that. So we see that in Matthew 24, Jesus warned them in verse 23 where he says, then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Messiah, or there he is, do not believe it. So when Thomas says to the other disciples, unless I see the scars, I won't believe, he's actually the one who listened to what Jesus said. Jesus said, when somebody comes and claims to be me, claim to be the Messiah, don't believe them. And so Thomas says, unless I see the scars on him, no matter what the guy claims, I won't believe him. I want to see the scars to verify for myself that he is Jesus. He is the Messiah. And then lastly, as you saw, Thomas was the one who was willing to die with Jesus when others like Peter did not want to die with Jesus. So that's the first point I want you to just highlight about this Thomas, that Thomas, in fact, was not an unbeliever. He was a believer more than even the other disciples. In verse 26, it says, 8 days later, his disciples were again in the room, which is probably today or yesterday or tomorrow. He says, this time Thomas was with them. Okay, now we are told here, Thomas now is with them and Jesus comes again. Jesus came through the locked doors, stood among them and says, peace to you. The same thing he said the previous Sunday when he went to see them on that Sunday evening. Then he focused his attention on Thomas. Now he knew Thomas had told the others that unless I see the scars, I won't believe. So Jesus turns to Thomas and he says to him, take your finger and examine my hands. So he shows him the hand and say, put your finger into the hole on my hand. Take your hand and stick it on my side. Don't be unbelieving, believe. And I think we're probably thrown off by the word, don't be unbelieving. Okay? I think it is probably a word that says, don't be doubting. Don't be skeptical. It is me. Okay? But it was good that Thomas was skeptical, so that he is not fooled by somebody who is an imposter, that he is able to check out the facts, because Jesus told them they must check out the facts. When somebody comes and claims to be Jesus, don't just believe him. When somebody comes and say he's a man of God, he's a pastor, he's a prophet, he's an apostle, don't just believe them. Be skeptical like Thomas. You must be able to say, unless I see the evidence of the gospel in what they say and do, I won't believe what they claim to be. And this is what then Thomas does. So Thomas touches him and he realizes that indeed it is Jesus. And then he falls down on his knees and says, my master, my Lord, and my God. He goes down in worship once he has seen that this indeed is Jesus. And then Jesus in verse 21 says to him, you believe because you have seen with your own eyes. Even better blessings are in store for those who believe without seeing. And that refers to you and me, because we haven't seen the scars on Jesus' hands. We haven't seen Jesus himself. We have believed because we have heard. As you know, faith comes from hearing. So we have heard the gospel and we have believed on the basis of that. And Jesus was saying, blessed are those who will believe without having to see me. But today, unfortunately, that's not that's not what is happening. So I want to conclude by just stating two important points that I don't want you to miss. I want you to take away these 2 points from today's story of Thomas. The first point is, we must not believe anybody who comes claiming to be a man of God, who comes claiming to be Jesus, who comes claiming to be an apostle, who comes claiming to be a prophet, whatever label they give themselves. We must not believe. We must have the skepticism of Thomas. We must test what they do and what they say before we believe them. That's the first point I want you to take note of. That we must be like Thomas. We must be skeptics. We must not just believe because somebody is making a claim of who they are. There are many people today who go around calling themselves apostle so and so, a prophet so and so, evangelist so and so. Unless you have seen their life, unless you have listened to what they are teaching the people, and you see that it is aligned with the scriptures, with the gospel, don't just believe them. The sad truth is, a lot of Christians today are being fooled by these people because they're not like Thomas. They believe too easily. And Jesus has warned us. People are going to come claiming to be the Messiah or claiming that Jesus is the Messiah, appearing to be preaching Jesus. And many people are fooled by that. Just because somebody comes with the Bible under their arm, we are made to believe them because they look like a man of God. They are wearing a suit and a tie. They are wearing a white suit for that matter. And it looks like they are the men of God. Jesus said, don't believe such people. You must check them out. And this is what Thomas teaches us. Unless we see the evidence, don't believe any man who comes to you claiming certain things. Don't believe that. But the other side of the story, which I also don't want you to miss, is this. We must not believe just because we saw a miracle performed. Because the other side of the danger of what Thomas did, because he wants to see the evidence, there are many who goes and follow these prophets or apostles and whatever, miracle workers. And they go and see people performing miracles. And because they see the miracle, they believe the person. But what they don't realize that some of these miracles are simply magic. They are not the work of the Spirit of God. They are the works of the devil, because the devil can perform miracles. We know in Egypt, those of you who are familiar with the story of Moses in Egypt, when Moses went to Pharaoh, God said to him, to show Pharaoh that you are sent by me, you must throw your stick on the ground and it will turn into a snake. And Moses did that to show to the Pharaoh that there is a powerful God who is behind him. Now the Pharaoh called his magicians to come. And they came with their sticks. And they threw their sticks on the ground. And their sticks turned into snakes. They performed exactly the same miracle that Moses performed. Except that Moses' snake ate up the other snakes of the magicians, the Egyptian magicians. So just because somebody performs a miracle or what appears to be a miracle, doesn't mean that you must believe them. The evidence of any person who is a man of God is his works, his behavior, and what he teaches. Is he teaching the true gospel, the true scriptural teachings of the apostles? If he's not teaching that, don't believe him. So the second point, therefore, I want to make is that we must not believe just because we have seen a miracle. It could be fake or it could be magic. I've come across people who have been fooled by this, who have been fooled by miracles that they've seen somebody perform. And they believe and they'll bet their life on this person because there's this belief this person is performing miracles. Some are fortune tellers. They go around telling people about their lives. Now there are people who, Sangomas have been doing that for ages. Fortune tellers have been doing that for ages. In the book of Acts, we're told that when Paul went to one of the towns, I can't remember which one now, there was a young girl who was a fortune teller. who had a demonic spirit in her, which was a fortune teller, and used to tell people their life stories. And people used to believe she is a god. And when Paul came, she knew who Paul was. She was going around the street following Paul, shouting to the people to say, this is a man of God. Now, Paul knew that the spirit which was saying that was not the spirit of God. And he rebuked the spirit in her and said, come out of her. And that spirit, the demonic spirit, came out of the girl, and she was no longer able to fortune tell. And they nearly killed her for that. Okay? So it's important that we understand that just because somebody is fortune telling and claiming that it is prophecy, or they are performing some miracles and claiming that it is the work of the Holy Spirit, we must not be fooled by that. The truth, or the only way we can verify the authenticity of any person is in their works, in their behavior, what kind of person they are they. And secondly, whether they preach the gospel. Because many of the people that people believe, they don't have any public appearance. The only way all the members see them is when they are on stage on church preaching. In fact, you must pay maybe 10,000 rand or 20,000 rand to be able to see them face to face and shake their hand. Otherwise, they don't interact with the public. Nobody really knows what they do behind closed doors. Nobody knows how they live their lives because they hide that part. Because they know if you were to see their lifestyle, you'll realize that they are not men of God. And so the story of Thomas tells us two things. One, we must not believe anybody who comes claiming to be Jesus. And two, we must not believe anybody because they perform some miracle or they claim to be the man of God. We must look for the evidence like Thomas. The evidence is discussed on Jesus' hands, or it is the way they live their lives, or it is the message that they preach from the Bible. Are they preaching the scriptures, or they are preaching their own ideas? That is what we should look for to be able to tell what the truth is. So those are the 2 points I want you to take away today. That Thomas, unlike a doubting Thomas, is in fact an example we should look forward to. In our day-to-day, when there's so much fake news and fake gospel, we need to be or to have the mind and attitude of Thomas and not be fooled by people who are coming around telling us all kinds of stories. You know that in John chapter 4, there's a woman who said to the people, the Samaritan woman, she said, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? Okay, so she invites people to come see. So she doesn't tell them. She says, come see this man. And the people come. Now, in verse 42, after the people have seen Jesus and listened to him, this is what they say to the woman in verse 42. We no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves. And this is the truth, the critical point, that all of us needs to get to the point where our faith is not based on what we have heard about from others, but based on what we personally have come to experience with Jesus. We ourselves have come to experience when we read the scriptures and know who Jesus is. That's where our faith must come from, not just from hearing from others. We need to test what we hear. It says in the book of Acts that the Bereans tested everything that they were taught by the apostles to make sure that the apostles were teaching what the scriptures say. And that's the kind of people we should be. When anybody preaches anything, you need to have the discipline of checking the scriptures yourself and not just listen to what they have to tell you. Okay, so let's follow the example of Thomas, where Jesus says to him, take your finger and examine my hands. Jesus invites us, just as he has invited Thomas to examine him. He invites us to examine whether the things are true or not. He doesn't want us to believe like fools. He wants us to test whether the things are true. He says, take your hand, stick it in my side. That's what the invitation of Jesus is today in this second Sunday of Easter. Jesus is inviting us to examine him. He's inviting us to check him out, to make sure that the gospel we are following is indeed the gospel of Jesus Christ that the apostles taught in the early days. Okay? So that's what I want us to take away today. The story of Thomas is a story of not believing. It is a story of a man who believed Jesus and was willing to die with him. It is a story that says, I'm going to be skeptical about the fake news and the fake gospel and the fake pastors and the fake apostles and the fake prophets. I'm going to only believe the ones who are genuine, who are true. So don't be fooled by imposters. Don't be fooled by those who come claiming to be Jesus or claiming to be apostle so and so or claiming to be prophet so and so. Don't be fooled. Be like Thomas and learn to say, unless I see the evidence, I won't believe. God bless you. Amen.